There are moments in life when everything you own can fit inside a single bag. For Emily Carter, that moment came on a bitterly cold November night. She was 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and living out of an old silver sedan that coughed and rattled every time she turned the key. The car sat in the corner of a church parking lot on the edge of a small Ohio town, hidden beneath the shadows of bare oak trees. The wind pushed against the windows with a low whistle. Emily pulled a worn blanket tighter around her shoulders and rested one hand on her swollen stomach. The baby kicked. A small movement. A tiny reminder that despite everything she had lost, someone still depended on her. And that terrified her. Not because she didn't love her daughter. She already loved her more than life itself. What frightened her was the future. How was she supposed to raise a child when she couldn't even afford a place to sleep? Just 1 year earlier, life had looked completely different. She had a husband, a home, a kitchen where laughter echoed through the walls, Sunday mornings filled with coffee and pancakes, evenings spent planning for the future. Then, in a single afternoon, everything disappeared. A state trooper knocked on her apartment door. A trucking accident. Heavy rain. A jackknifed trailer. No survivors. The words shattered her world in less than 30 seconds. After Michael's death came the hospital bills. Then the debt. Then the collection notices. Then the eviction. One loss led to another until there was nothing left to lose. Now her entire life fit inside the trunk of a car. A few changes of clothes. Some family photographs. A baby blanket she had bought before everything fell apart. And a wedding ring she still couldn't bring herself to sell. Most people never looked at her twice. When they did, they saw a homeless woman. A statistic. A problem. Someone whose story had already reached its ending. But they were wrong. Because sometimes life saves its greatest chapter for the moment when all hope seems gone. 3 days before Thanksgiving, Emily received a letter. At first, she almost threw it away. Most of the mail she received these days was either a bill she couldn't pay or another reminder of how badly life had gone off course. But this envelope was different. The return address belonged to a law office. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a brief letter informing her that she had inherited property from her late grandfather, a man she barely remembered. According to the paperwork, the inheritance consisted of an abandoned textile mill and 1 acre of land located outside a tiny Appalachian town called Hollow Creek. The attorney handling the estate described the property as virtually worthless. The building was condemned. The land generated no income, and a development company had already offered cash to purchase it immediately. To anyone else, it looked like a burden. One final disappointment in a life already full of them. Emily folded the letter and stared through the windshield into the darkening evening sky. She had less than $80 left. Winter was coming, and her baby would be born in less than 2 months. Selling the property seemed like the obvious choice. The only choice. Yet something deep inside her refused to let go of it. A feeling she couldn't explain. A quiet voice whispering that maybe, just maybe, this forgotten place in a forgotten town was about to change everything. The next morning, Emily woke before sunrise. The church parking lot was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic and the soft tapping of rain against her windshield. For a few moments, she forgot where she was. Forgot about the cold. Forgot about the ache in her back. Forgot about the reality waiting for her outside those fogged-up windows. Then her daughter kicked, and reality came rushing back. She was still homeless. Still pregnant. Still running out of time. Emily checked her phone. $73.42. That was all she had left in her bank account. $73.42. She stared at the number for a long time. Funny how a number can make your entire future feel smaller. A few months earlier, $73 wouldn't have meant much. Now it felt like the thin thread holding her life together. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number? Normally she ignored calls from unfamiliar numbers. Most were debt collectors. But something made her answer. Hello. Mayor's Emily Carter. The voice belonged to a woman. Professional? Calm. Precise. Yes. This is Rebecca Collins from Collins and Hart Legal Services. I'm calling regarding the property you inherited in Hollow Creek. Emily sat up straighter. The inheritance? For a moment, she'd almost forgotten about it. Yes, she said quietly. I received the paperwork. Excellent. I'm calling because the buyer is requesting an answer. The buyer? The development company interested in the property. Rebecca paused. They've increased their offer. Emily's heart skipped. Increased it to what? $12,000. Silence. For a moment, she thought she had heard wrong. $12,000? To some people, that wasn't life-changing money. But to Emily, it was everything. It was first and last month's rent. It was a crib, baby clothes, medical expenses, food, safety, a chance to stop sleeping in parking lots, a chance to bring her daughter home to an actual home. Rebecca continued. They're prepared to close immediately. Emily swallowed hard. The rain outside suddenly sounded louder. $12,000? It felt like a miracle. The kind of miracle desperate people pray for. The kind that arrives just when they can no longer hold on. So all I have to do is sign, Emily asked. Correct. And then the money is mine. Within 72 hours? Emily closed her eyes. She could almost picture it. A small apartment, a warm bed, a nursery painted soft yellow, her daughter sleeping safely instead of spending her first nights in a car. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't terrifying. Then Rebecca said something strange, something small, something that should have meant nothing, yet it changed everything. Frankly, the attorney said, I'm surprised they're paying this much. Emily opened her eyes. What do you mean? A brief pause. The property records show the land has very little market value. The building itself is condemned and likely needs demolition. Another pause. If I were being purely practical, I'd say they're overpaying. Emily stared through the windshield. Overpaying. The words lingered in her mind. If the place was worthless, why keep raising the offer? Why the urgency? Why the pressure? A cold feeling settled into her chest. Not fear. Curiosity. The same feeling she'd experienced as a little girl whenever she knew someone wasn't telling the whole truth. Have you ever seen the property? Emily asked. No. Do you know why they want it? Not specifically. They never said, developers buy land all the time. The answer felt rehearsed. Not dishonest, just incomplete. Emily rubbed her stomach. The baby kicked again, almost as if she were reminding her mother to pay attention, to think, to slow down. For the next few seconds, Emily said nothing. Her entire future hung in the balance. One signature. That was all it would take. One signature, and every immediate problem in her life would disappear. Yet something deep inside her refused to say yes. Maybe it was stubbornness, maybe intuition, or maybe it was the simple fact that after losing so much, she was tired of making decisions out of fear. Finally, she spoke. I want to see it first. The attorney fell silent. Ms. Carter, I want to visit the property. That's not necessary. Maybe not. Emily looked down at the photograph of Michael tucked into her visor. The picture had faded around the edges. His smile hadn't. But I'm going anyway. A long pause followed. Then Rebecca sighed softly. As you wish. She provided directions to Hollow Creek, a tiny mountain town nearly 4 hours away. Population less than 1,000, a place most people had never heard of. After the call ended, Emily sat alone in the driver's seat. Rain continued to fall. The sky remained gray. Her circumstances hadn't changed. She was still broke, still homeless, still terrified. Yet something felt different now. For the first time in months, she wasn't running from her life. She was moving toward something. She didn't know what waited for her in Hollow Creek. Maybe nothing. Maybe an abandoned building and a wasted trip. Maybe one last disappointment. But as she started the engine and folded the inheritance papers onto the passenger seat, a strange feeling settled into her heart. A feeling she hadn't experienced since before Michael died. Hope. Small. Fragile. Easy to break. But hope nonetheless. And sometimes, that's all a person needs to take the very first step toward a completely different life. The drive to Hollow Creek took nearly 4 hours. 4 hours of winding roads, endless forests, and quiet stretches of highway that seemed forgotten by time. The farther Emily traveled, the farther she felt from the life she had known. The city disappeared first, then the shopping centers, then the gas stations and traffic lights. Eventually, all that remained were mountains, pine trees, and narrow roads twisting through valleys painted in the colors of late autumn. Orange, gold, crimson, beautiful, lonely, the kind of landscape that made you feel very small beneath a very large sky. By the time she reached Hollow Creek, the sun was beginning to sink behind the mountains. The town looked like something from another era. A single main street, a diner, a hardware store, a small white church, a few brick buildings with faded signs hanging above their doors. Nothing flashy, nothing modern, just a place that had quietly survived while the rest of the world rushed past. Emily parked near the diner and stepped out of her car. Her legs ached instantly. The baby shifted inside her stomach. She placed a hand over the movement and smiled despite herself. "Almost there, sweetheart," she whispered. The words caught in her throat. She wasn't entirely sure where there was anymore. Inside the diner, the smell of coffee and homemade pie filled the air. An elderly waitress stood behind the counter. She looked up as Emily entered. For a moment, their eyes met, and something unexpected happened. The woman smiled, not the forced smile strangers often gave. Not pity, not judgment, just kindness, pure and simple. The kind of kindness that had become rare in Emily's life. "Long drive?" the woman asked. Emily nodded. "You could say that." The waitress poured her a cup of coffee before she even ordered. Then she noticed Emily's stomach. "Baby due soon?" "About 8 weeks." The woman's eyes softened. "My daughter was about that far along when she came through here years ago." Emily felt an unexpected lump rise in her throat. Nobody had spoken to her like a person in a very long time. Most people saw the old car, the worn clothes, the exhaustion. They saw struggle. This woman somehow saw Emily. After a few minutes, Emily asked about the abandoned mill. The waitress froze, only for a second. But Emily noticed. "The Carter Mill?" she asked quietly. Emily nodded. "It belonged to my grandfather." The woman stared at her, then slowly lowered the coffee pot. "You're Henry Carter's granddaughter." Emily blinked. "You knew him?" The waitress let out a soft laugh. "Knew him." She shook her head. "Honey, everybody in this town knew Henry Carter?" The word surprised Emily. Growing up, nobody talked much about her grandfather. He had died when she was young. The family rarely mentioned him. She had always assumed he was just another forgotten relative. "He was a good man," the waitress said. "One of the best." There was something in her voice. Respect. The kind that couldn't be faked. Emily suddenly felt curious. For the first time, who had her grandfather really been? The waitress gave her directions. A dirt road outside town, half a mile beyond an abandoned railroad crossing. "You can't miss it," she said. Then she paused, and her expression changed, almost as if she wanted to say more, but didn't. "Just be careful out there." Emily frowned. "Why?" The woman hesitated, then forced a smile. "Oh, It's an old building, that's all. But Emily wasn't convinced. Something was being left unsaid. Something important. The mill appeared 30 minutes later, hidden among towering trees. Silent. Massive. Waiting. Even from a distance, it looked abandoned. Broken windows reflected the fading sunlight. Vines crawled across brick walls. Parts of the roof had collapsed inward. Nature was slowly reclaiming every inch of it. Emily parked nearby and stepped out. The cold mountain air bit at her cheeks. For a long moment, she simply stared. This was it. The inheritance. The place everyone insisted was worthless. Honestly, it looked worthless. Her heart sank. The developer had been right. The lawyer had been right. Maybe she had driven 4 hours for nothing. Maybe she should have taken the money. Maybe. Then she noticed something. Fresh tire tracks. Her eyes narrowed. The mud around the entrance was wet from recent rain. The tracks couldn't be old. Someone had been here recently. Very recently. A strange chill ran through her. Why would anyone visit an abandoned mill? She followed the tracks toward the building. As she got closer, she noticed something else. A heavy chain wrapped around the main entrance. And attached to it was a brand new industrial lock. Not rusty. Not old. New! Emily stopped. Her pulse quickened. This made no sense. If the property was abandoned, who locked it? And why? The questions multiplied inside her mind. She moved slowly along the side of the building. Then she found it. A smaller service door hidden beneath overgrown vines. Unlike the main entrance, this door wasn't chained. Instead, it had an ancient brass lock. Old, weathered, different. And hanging from a nail beside the frame was something that made Emily's breath catch. A small metal key, attached to a faded tag. The tag contained only 2 words written in shaky handwriting. For Emily. She froze. The world seemed to stop. The wind. The birds. Even her own breathing. For a long moment, she simply stared at the key. Because suddenly, this didn't feel like an abandoned property anymore. It felt like someone had been waiting for her. And for the first time since arriving in Hollow Creek, Emily realized something. The story she had been told about this place wasn't true. Not even close. And somewhere beyond that locked door, the real story was waiting. For several seconds, Emily simply stood there staring at the key. The faded tag swayed gently in the wind. For Emily, her name, written by someone who had expected her to come, someone who had believed she would eventually find this place. A strange feeling settled over her. Not fear. Not exactly. It felt more like standing at the edge of a memory she didn't know she had. Slowly, she reached out and took the key from the nail. The metal felt cold against her fingertips. Old, real, waiting. The lock resisted at first. She had to wiggle the key several times before it finally turned. A loud metallic click echoed through the silent valley. The sound seemed unnaturally loud, as if the building itself had been asleep for years and was only now waking up. Emily pulled the door open. The hinges groaned. A rush of cool air rolled out from the darkness inside. It smelled of dust, old wood, machine oil, and time. Lots and lots of time. She stepped inside. At first, she could barely see anything. Then her eyes slowly adjusted. Sunlight streamed through broken windows high above, creating long golden beams across the enormous room. Dust floated through the air like tiny stars. The mill was far larger than it had appeared from outside. Massive machinery stood frozen in place. Conveyor belts, steel gears, wooden work tables, everything covered in decades of dust. Yet something felt strange. The place wasn't chaotic. It wasn't abandoned in the way abandoned places usually are. It felt preserved, as if someone had carefully left everything exactly where it belonged. Emily moved deeper inside. Her footsteps echoed through the silence. The baby shifted inside her stomach. She rested a hand there instinctively. "It's okay," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure whether she was speaking to the baby or herself. Near the center of the mill stood an enormous machine. Its iron frame stretched nearly to the ceiling. Emily had no idea what it once did, but something about it drew her attention. Not the machine itself. The wall behind it? A section of brick looked different from the rest. Newer. Cleaner? She frowned, then walked closer. The closer she got, the more obvious it became. Someone had sealed up part of the wall years ago. Her pulse quickened. Carefully, she searched the area. Finally, hidden beneath an old workbench, she found a rusted crowbar. It took several minutes, and far more effort than a woman 7 months pregnant should probably have been exerting. But eventually one brick came loose. Then another, and another, until a narrow opening appeared. Behind the wall was a small room. A hidden room. Emily's breath caught. A flashlight sat on a nearby shelf. Surprisingly, it worked. The beam cut through the darkness. Inside the room stood a desk, a wooden chair, several filing cabinets, and on the desk, a single envelope. Nothing else. Just an envelope. Waiting. The front contained only 2 words. "My Emily." The sight of her name nearly broke her. Nobody called her that anymore. Not since Michael. Not since before life had fallen apart. Suddenly the room felt very quiet. Very still. Slowly, she sat down in the old chair. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Several pages. Written in careful handwriting, she began to read. "My Emily, if you are reading this, then it means life has carried you here at last. I wish I could see the woman you've become. I wish I could have watched you grow up. But some wishes belong only to heaven. The first thing I need you to know is this. I never stopped loving you." Emily stopped reading. Her vision blurred instantly. Tears filled her eyes. She swallowed hard and continued. "Your mother believed keeping distance was best after your father left. We disagreed often, but she loved you deeply, and I respected her wishes. That doesn't mean I forgot you. Not for a single day. Every birthday, I wrote a letter. Every Christmas, I bought a gift. I kept them all here, waiting for the day you might come." Emily lowered the pages. Her chest tightened. For years, she had believed her grandfather simply didn't care. That he had vanished from their lives because he wanted to. Now she discovered something entirely different. A lonely old man had been loving her from a distance. Waiting. Hoping. Remembering. The tears came harder now. Hot. Unstoppable. Because grief isn't always caused by losing love. Sometimes it's caused by discovering love was there all along. She wiped her eyes and kept reading. By the time you find this, people will have told you this mill is worthless. They are wrong. They have been wrong for a very long time. There are things hidden beneath this land that powerful people would do almost anything to possess. And there are truths they would do almost anything to bury. I spent 20 years trying to protect both. If you're here, then I have failed to finish that fight. And that means the choice now belongs to you." Emily's heart began to pound. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. The letter continued. "Before you decide anything, you deserve the truth. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. Open the bottom drawer of the desk. Everything begins there." Emily slowly lowered the pages. Silence filled the hidden room. Outside, the wind pushed gently against the old building. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. She stared at the desk. At the bottom drawer, a drawer she hadn't noticed before. A drawer her grandfather had prepared years ago, specifically for her. And in that moment, Emily realized something that made goosebumps rise along her arms. The inheritance was never the mill. It was never the land. It was never the money. The real inheritance was a story, a truth, a purpose. And somewhere inside that drawer, her grandfather was about to change her life forever. For a long moment, Emily simply sat there. The letter rested in her trembling hands. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the broken windows of the mill. Inside, the silence felt almost sacred. Her grandfather's final words echoed through her mind. Open the bottom drawer of the desk. Everything begins there. She stared at the old wooden desk. It looked ordinary. Nothing special. Just another forgotten piece of furniture gathering dust in a forgotten room. But then again, everything about this place had appeared ordinary at first. And everything she'd believed so far had turned out to be wrong. Slowly, she reached for the bottom drawer. At first, it wouldn't budge. The wood had swollen with age. She pulled harder. With a sharp crack, the drawer finally slid open. Inside were dozens of neatly organized folders. Bound journals. Maps? Photographs. And on top of everything sat a thick leather notebook. The cover was worn smooth from years of handling. Across the front, written in faded ink, were 4 words. If something happens to me. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She opened it. The first page contained a handwritten note. Emily, if you're reading this, it means I was right to be afraid. The people interested in this property were never interested in the mill. The mill was only the excuse. The land beneath it is what they truly wanted. Emily frowned. She turned the page, and suddenly the story began to unfold. Page after page. Year after year. Evidence. Research. Notes. Observations. Her grandfather had spent more than 20 years documenting something extraordinary. Beneath Hollow Creek lay one of the largest underground spring systems in the entire region. A massive natural aquifer fed by mountain runoff and protected by layers of ancient limestone. The water was exceptionally pure, valuable beyond imagination. According to geological studies, it could supply clean drinking water to millions of people. Emily stared at the numbers, the diagrams, the maps. At first, she struggled to understand what she was looking at. Then she reached a section highlighted in red, and suddenly everything clicked. The development company wasn't planning housing projects. They weren't planning commercial buildings. They weren't planning anything they had publicly claimed. They wanted the water. The entire operation had been a lie. A carefully crafted lie worth billions of dollars. Emily's pulse quickened. She continued reading. Over the years, the corporation had quietly purchased dozens of surrounding properties through shell companies and intermediaries. Each purchase seemed harmless on its own, but together, they formed a massive patchwork surrounding Hollow Creek. Her grandfather had noticed the pattern long before anyone else, and once he understood what they were doing, he began asking questions. Questions powerful people didn't appreciate. Questions that made him dangerous. The further Emily read, the more disturbing the story became. Inspection reports had disappeared. Environmental studies had been altered. Local officials suddenly changed their positions after private meetings. Witnesses recanted statements. Documents vanished. Entire investigations quietly died. Her grandfather had documented all of it. Every detail. Every inconsistency. Every lie. The man hadn't spent his life running a mill. He had spent his life building a case. Then Emily found the photographs. Her breath caught. The images showed men in expensive suits standing near the property years earlier. Vehicles parked outside the mill at night. Construction surveys performed without permits. Meetings conducted in secret. On the back of one photograph, her grandfather had written, "They think nobody is watching." Another note read, "Truth leaves footprints." Emily found herself smiling through tears. For the first time, she felt as if she knew him. Not the distant grandfather from old family stories. The real man. Patient. Determined. Quietly brave. The kind of person who never sought attention but refused to back down when something was wrong. Then she reached the final section, and everything changed. Inside a sealed envelope was a legal affidavit. Signed, witnessed, notarized. Attached to it was a flash drive. Emily unfolded the document. As she read, her eyes widened. The affidavit came from a former executive employed by the corporation, a man who had resigned years earlier. According to his sworn statement, company leadership knowingly concealed environmental data proving their extraction plans would permanently damage the region's water supply. They understood the risks. They simply didn't care. The profits were too large. The statement named names, provided dates, referenced meetings, emails, financial transactions. It was devastating, potentially enough to destroy the entire operation. Emily sat back in her chair. Her heart pounded. This wasn't speculation. This wasn't theory. This was evidence. Real evidence. The kind that could change everything. Suddenly, the offer to buy the property made perfect sense. The urgency. The pressure. The increasing amounts. $12,000 wasn't generosity. It was desperation. They wanted her signature before she discovered the truth. Before she opened this room. Before she found what her grandfather had hidden. A chill traveled down her spine. Then she noticed one final envelope resting beneath the affidavit. Smaller. Personal. Addressed directly to her. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside was a single page. A final message. Emily, by now you know enough to understand the choice before you. You can sell the property. No one would blame you. You've suffered enough. You deserve peace. You deserve security for yourself and your daughter. But if you choose that path, the truth dies here. Everything I spent my life protecting disappears. The decision belongs to you. Not to lawyers. Not to corporations. Not to politicians. To you. Whatever you decide, know this. I have always been proud of you. And I have always loved you. More than you'll ever know. Emily lowered the letter. The tears came again. But these tears felt different. Not grief. Not loneliness. Something else. Something warmer. For years, life had taken things away from her. Her husband, her home, her stability, her future. But sitting there in that hidden room, surrounded by the evidence of one man's courage, she realized something. For the first time in a very long while, life was giving something back. Not money, not property, purpose. And for a woman who had spent months wondering whether she had the strength to keep going, purpose was worth more than anything money could buy. Emily didn't sleep that night. She tried. She really did. She stretched an old blanket across the back seat of her car and closed her eyes. But every time she drifted off, she saw her grandfather's words. The decision belongs to you, not to lawyers, not to corporations, to you. Outside, the mountains sat quietly beneath a blanket of stars. Inside the car, Emily rested both hands on her stomach. The baby moved softly. A tiny kick. Then another, almost like a reminder. A reminder that every decision she made now affected more than herself. For months, her only goal had been survival. Find food. Find gas money. Find a safe place to park. Make it through another day. But now there was something larger at stake. Something bigger than rent money. Bigger than $12,000. Truth. And once you know the truth, it's difficult to pretend you don't. The following morning, Emily drove back into town. The sun had barely risen. A thin layer of fog drifted across the streets. Everything looked peaceful. Normal. Yet she couldn't stop thinking about the documents hidden inside the mill. The evidence. The lies. The years her grandfather had spent protecting something that belonged not just to him, but to everyone who called Hollow Creek home. She parked outside the diner. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. The same waitress looked up. The same warm smile. The same kind eyes. But this time, Emily noticed something else. Recognition. As if the woman had been expecting her. "You found something, didn't you?" the waitress asked quietly. Emily froze. The older woman simply poured coffee into a mug, then slid it across the counter. "You've got the same look your grandfather used to get?" Emily sat down slowly. "What look is that?" The woman smiled sadly. The look people get when they discover something they can't walk away from. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Emily asked the question that had been haunting her. "Who was he?" The waitress looked out the window, a distant memory passing through her eyes. "Most folks thought Henry Carter was just an old mill owner." She shook her head. They were wrong. Emily listened. "He spent years helping people around here." Quietly. "When farms struggled during droughts, he'd show up with supplies. When families couldn't afford repairs, he'd fix things himself. When folks lost hope, somehow Henry always found a way to remind them they mattered." The woman smiled. "He wasn't rich, but he was the kind of man people trusted." The word settled deep inside Emily, because trust was becoming rare, and apparently her grandfather had earned it. The waitress leaned closer. Toward the end, people started noticing strangers coming through town. Emily felt her pulse quicken. Strangers. Businessmen. Lawyers. Surveyors. Folks asking questions about land. The woman's expression darkened. Henry didn't like it. He said they were after something valuable. Emily said nothing. The waitress stared directly at her. He was right, wasn't he? For the first time, Emily realized the town knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Enough to suspect. Enough to worry. Enough to remember. By noon, she found herself standing outside a small law office near the courthouse. The sign read, "Benjamin and Reed Attorneys at Law." The building was modest. The paint was peeling. The steps creaked beneath her feet. Nothing about it looked impressive. Yet her grandfather's files contained dozens of references to one particular attorney, a woman named Charlotte Reed, the last person he had trusted. Emily pushed open the door. An older receptionist greeted her. "Can I help you?" Emily hesitated. Then she placed the affidavit from the hidden room onto the desk. "I think I need to speak with Charlotte Reed." The receptionist glanced down, then immediately looked up again. Her expression changed. Completely. "Please have a seat." 10 minutes later, a woman in her early 40s entered the waiting room. Sharp eyes. Gray blazer. "No nonsense." She extended her hand. "Charlotte Reed." Emily stood. "I'm Emily Carter." For a brief moment, Charlotte simply stared. Then her eyes widened. "My God, you look exactly like your mother." The words hit Emily unexpectedly. Nobody had said that in years. Charlotte motioned toward her office. "Come with me." The meeting lasted nearly 3 hours. Emily showed her everything. The journals, the maps, the affidavit, the photographs, the flash drive. Charlotte read every page carefully. Listened. Cross-referenced names. Took notes. And with each passing minute, her expression grew darker, more serious, more determined. Finally, she sat back in her chair, silent, thinking. Then she looked directly at Emily. "Do you understand what you have—" Emily shook her head. "Not really." Charlotte exhaled slowly. "You have enough evidence to trigger a state investigation." Emily's heart skipped. The attorney continued. "You potentially have evidence of fraud, environmental misconduct, conspiracy, corruption, and corporate cover-ups spanning decades." The room felt suddenly smaller, bigger. "Both at the same time?" Charlotte folded her hands. "Your grandfather spent years trying to expose this. Why didn't he win?" Charlotte's eyes softened. "Because he was alone." The answer hit harder than Emily expected. Alone? She understood that word. She had lived that word. Slept with it. Cried because of it. But Charlotte wasn't finished. "He isn't alone anymore. Silence filled the room. Emily stared at her. Then Charlotte smiled. A small smile. But a real one. If you're willing to fight, Emily. She slid the affidavit across the desk. Then let's finish what your grandfather started. For a moment, fear rushed through her. Fear of losing. Fear of failing. Fear of making the wrong decision. Then she thought about Michael. About the baby. About sleeping in parking lots. About all the moments life had knocked her down. And all the moments she'd gotten back up. Slowly, Emily nodded. The fear didn't disappear, but something stronger appeared beside it. Courage! Real courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward while fear walks beside you. And at that moment, Emily made her choice. She would not sell. She would not run. She would not look away. A homeless pregnant woman with less than $100 in her account had just declared war against a billion-dollar corporation. And somehow, for the first time in a very long time, she felt stronger than ever before. The first news article appeared 3 days later. At first, nobody paid much attention. A small-town newspaper buried the story halfway down its front page. Local woman challenges. Development company over Hollow Creek property. It should have disappeared unnoticed. Instead, it spread. One reporter called another. Then a regional television station picked it up. Then a larger newspaper from Columbus. Within weeks, the story was everywhere. People weren't interested because of legal documents, or geological reports, or environmental regulations. They were interested because of Emily. A pregnant homeless woman living in her car had refused a corporate buyout and was standing against a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. People understood that story. People rooted for that story. Because deep down, everyone knows what it feels like to be underestimated. Meanwhile, the corporation reacted exactly as Charlotte expected. First came the phone calls. Polite, professional, friendly, executives expressing concern, offering compromise, offering cooperation, offering money, lots of money. The initial offer of $12,000 quickly became $50,000, then $100,000, then $200,000. Each offer arrived with the same condition. Sign, stay quiet, walk away. Emily refused every single one. The rejections surprised even her. A few months earlier, she would have accepted almost anything. Back then, she was fighting for survival. Now she was fighting for something bigger. And once a person finds a purpose worth protecting, money begins to lose its power. The pressure intensified. Private investigators appeared in town. Corporate lawyers questioned her background. Reporters dug into her past. Social media filled with accusations and rumors. Some claimed she was greedy. Others claimed she was lying. A few suggested she was being manipulated. The attacks hurt, more than she admitted. Some nights she sat alone inside her car and cried, not because she wanted to quit, but because she was exhausted. Pregnancy had become harder. Her ankles swelled. Her back constantly ached. Sleep came in short, uncomfortable bursts. There were moments she questioned everything. Moments she wondered if the corporation might eventually crush her. After all, they had money, power, connections, entire teams of lawyers. What did she have? One old mill, a stack of documents, and faith. Then something remarkable happened. The people of Hollow Creek stepped forward, one by one. At first, it was small things. The diner owner refused to let Emily pay for breakfast. The hardware store owner repaired her car for free. A retired teacher offered her a spare bedroom. A local church organized meals. An elderly widow knitted baby blankets. A farmer delivered fresh vegetables every week. None of them were wealthy, but together, they gave Emily something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. For so long, she had believed she was alone. Now she understood something her grandfather had known all along. Communities aren't built by buildings. They're built by people. Months passed. The investigation expanded. More witnesses came forward. Former employees, contractors, local officials. Some had remained silent for years. Others were simply waiting for someone brave enough to speak first. The evidence grew, and grew, and grew, until the truth became impossible to hide. The corporation's public image began to crack. Investors demanded answers. Regulators launched inquiries. Internal documents surfaced. Emails leaked. Financial records emerged. Every week brought another revelation. Another headline, another piece of the puzzle. Then came the day everything changed. Emily was sitting in Charlotte's office when the phone rang. Charlotte listened silently, asked a few questions, then slowly hung up. For several seconds, she said nothing. Emily felt her stomach tighten. "What is it?" Charlotte smiled. A real smile. The kind that comes only after carrying a heavy burden for a very long time. "They surrendered." Emily blinked. "What?" "They surrendered." The words didn't feel real. Charlotte laughed softly. "The corporation is settling." Emily stared. Unable to process it? Months of fear. Months of pressure. Months of uncertainty. And suddenly, it was over. The settlement was historic. The corporation agreed to abandon the project permanently. They surrendered all claims to the water rights. They funded environmental protections for the region. They paid millions into community development programs. And they established a substantial compensation fund for Hollow Creek residents affected by years of deception. Justice had finally arrived. Not because a powerful person demanded it. Not because a politician intervened. But because one ordinary woman refused to give up. A few weeks later, Emily stood outside the old mill. Snow covered the ground. Christmas lights glowed along Main Street. The town looked different now. Hope does that to a place. It changes everything. The mill behind her was changing too. Workers repaired windows. Volunteers painted walls. Community groups donated tools and supplies. The forgotten building was coming back to life. Just as she had. A sudden pain made her stop. Then another. Charlotte, standing nearby, looked concerned. Emily smiled. A tear rolled down her cheek. "I think it's time." 12 hours later, surrounded by people who had become family, Emily gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She named her Grace, because no other name felt right. As she held her daughter for the first time, she thought about everything that had happened. Michael, the car, the loneliness, the letter, the mill, her grandfather, the fight, the miracles hidden inside the struggle. She realized something then. The inheritance had never been the property. It had never been the water. It had never been the settlement money. The true inheritance was courage, passed from one generation to the next. A quiet old man had protected a town. Years later, his granddaughter had finished the job. And now a little girl named Grace would grow up knowing that her mother had once stood against impossible odds and refused to surrender. Years later, visitors would come to Hollow Creek and see a beautiful community center standing where the abandoned mill once sat. They would see workshops, classrooms, a food pantry, programs for struggling families, support groups for single mothers. Everything the town once needed. Everything Emily once needed. Most would never know the whole story. They would never know how close it all came to disappearing. But Emily knew. Every time she walked through those doors holding her daughter's hand, she remembered. Sometimes the world looks at a broken building and sees nothing. Sometimes it looks at a homeless pregnant woman and sees nothing. Sometimes it looks at a forgotten town and sees nothing. But value isn't determined by what others see. It's determined by what you're willing to protect. And in the end, Emily discovered that the most important thing she inherited wasn't land. It wasn't money. It wasn't even a mill. It was the understanding that even the most ordinary person can change the future when they choose courage over fear. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is one forgotten place, one hidden truth, and one person brave enough to keep going when everyone else tells them to stop. Sometimes life gives us things that look like burdens. A broken relationship, a painful loss, a season of struggle we never asked for. Emily believed she had inherited a worthless old mill. What she really inherited was something far more valuable. Purpose! Because the greatest gifts in life are rarely money or property. They're the lessons that teach us who we are when everything else is taken away. Her grandfather left her courage. The courage to stand up when it would have been easier to walk away. The courage to believe that one ordinary person can still make a difference. And maybe that's the lesson for all of us. No matter how difficult your circumstances may be today, your story is not over. The chapter you're struggling through right now may be preparing you for something greater than you can imagine. So don't give up. Keep going. Keep believing. And keep taking that next step forward. Because sometimes the very thing that looks worthless today becomes the greatest blessing of your life tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below and tell us, what is the most valuable lesson life has ever taught you? And if you enjoy stories about hope, resilience, and second chances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our community. Remember, your circumstances do not define your worth. They never have, and they never will. A homeless pregnant woman was living out of her car with less than $80 to her name when she inherited what everyone called a worthless old mill. But what she discovered inside would expose a secret hidden for decades, save an entire town, and change her life forever. If you believe in second chances, hidden inheritance stories, and inspirational journeys that prove hope can appear when everything seems lost, you're going to want to stay until the very end. And before we begin, don't forget to subscribe and join our community of resilience, hope, and life-changing stories.